They called her broken, soulless, a stain on her bloodline. At 19, Kaelira Voss stood in chains before the Black Fortress, sent as tribute to a king more monster than man, payment for her father's failed rebellion. The wolf clans whispered his name in terror, Rhaegor Thorn, the Alpha King, whose curse had devoured 100 would-be brides. She had no beast, no power, no hope. But when the fortress gates groaned open and darkness swallowed her whole, Kaelira made a choice that would shatter an empire. She would not beg. She would not break. If you want to see how a powerless girl conquers a cursed kingdom, stay until the end, and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. Hit that like button now. The wolves came for her at dawn. Kaelira Voss knelt in the mud outside her family's crumbling stone hut, wrists bound with iron that bit into her skin. Around her, the village of Greyfang gathered like vultures circling a carcass. Women clutching their children, men with arms crossed, eyes cold as winter stone. No one spoke. No one needed to. She was the sacrifice, the payment, the thing that would keep them all alive. Stand up, girl. The voice belonged to Overseer Merrick, a barrel-chested enforcer with a scar cleaving his face in two. He yanked her to her feet by her hair, and she gasped but did not cry out. She had learned long ago that tears only made them hungrier. Her father sat slumped against the wall of their hut, head in his hands. Garin Voss had once been a warrior, broad-shouldered, fierce-eyed, a man who'd rallied half the frontier clans to rise against the Alpha King's iron rule. But rebellion without power was just noise, and Rhaegor Thorn had crushed it like a boot on an anthill. The price? Garin's firstborn daughter, delivered to the Black Fortress, alive. Look at her, someone muttered from the crowd. No beast, no wolf. She'll be dead before the first moon. Better her than us, another replied. Kaelira lifted her chin. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. Merrick shoved her toward the waiting carriage, a black iron cage on wheels, drawn by two massive dire wolves with eyes like burnt coals. The animals snarled as she approached, saliva dripping from fangs the size of daggers. Get in, Merrick ordered. She climbed inside. The cage door slammed shut behind her. As the carriage lurched forward, rattling over the frozen ground, Kaelira pressed her face against the bars and looked back one last time. Her father had risen. He stood in the doorway, hollow-eyed, watching her disappear. He did not wave, did not call her name. He simply turned and went inside. So this is how it ends, she thought. Not with a roar, with silence. The journey to the Black Fortress took 3 days. 3 days of bitter cold, of gnawing hunger, of sleeping on the floor of the iron cage while the dire wolves growled and snapped at her through the bars. The guards, two silent warriors in black armor, barely acknowledged her existence. They fed her once a day, stale bread and water. Nothing more. On the second night, Kaelira dreamed. She stood in a forest of bone-white trees, their branches clawing at a blood-red sky. Ahead of her, a figure moved through the mist, massive, hulking, its form shifting between man and beast. Its eyes burned gold, then black, then nothing at all. It turned toward her, and it screamed. She woke gasping, sweat soaking her thin dress despite the freezing air. The guards did not stir. The wolves watched her with unblinking eyes. Just a dream, she whispered to herself. Just a dream. But her hands were shaking. Odd. The Black Fortress rose from the mountains like a shard of midnight. It was not built. It was carved. Gouged directly from the living stone of the Ash Peak Range, its walls towered impossibly high, jagged and sharp as broken teeth. No banners flew from its battlements. No light shone from its windows. It looked less like a palace and more like a tomb. The carriage stopped at the outer gates. One of the guards dismounted and struck a massive iron gong 3 times. The sound rolled across the mountains like thunder. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the gates began to move. They opened with a shriek of metal on stone, revealing a courtyard bathed in shadow. Torches burned along the walls, their flames a sickly green that cast no warmth. At the far end of the courtyard stood a second gate, smaller, older, covered in carvings that hurt to look at. The guards hauled Kaelira from the cage and dragged her forward. Wait, she said. What happens now? They did not answer. The inner gate opened. Beyond it was a hall so vast it seemed to swallow sound itself. Pillars of black stone rose into darkness. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting Kaelira's pale, ragged figure like a ghost. At the far end of the hall, barely visible in the gloom, sat a throne, and on that throne sat him, Rhaegor Thorne, the Alpha King. Even from a distance, his presence was crushing. He did not move, did not speak, but the air itself seemed to bend around him, heavy and suffocating, like the moment before a storm breaks. The guard shoved Kaelira forward. She stumbled, caught herself, and forced her legs to move. One step, then another. The hall seemed endless. As she drew closer, details emerged. The king wore black armor, scorched and dented, as if it had survived 100 battles. His hands rested on the arms of the throne, massive hands, clawed and scarred. His face was shadowed beneath a crown of twisted iron, but she could see his eyes. Gold, burning, inhuman. Kaelira stopped 10 paces from the throne. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Closer," a voice said. It was not the king who spoke. It came from the shadows to his right, a tall, thin man in robes of dark crimson. His face was sharp, aristocratic, his smile cold as a blade. "Closer, girl. Let him see what they've sent him." Kaelira took another step, then another. She could feel the king's gaze on her now, heavy as a hand around her throat. The man in crimson circled her slowly, appraising. 19 years old, no awakening, no beast. He clicked his tongue. And this is what Garin Voss offers as tribute? A defective whelp? Heat flared in Kaelira's chest. She lifted her eyes and met the king's burning stare. "I am here," she said quietly. As promised. The hall went deathly silent. The man in crimson froze. "You dare speak without—" "Enough, Vaelric." The king's voice was a low rumble, like stone grinding against stone. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Every syllable carried weight. Vaelric bowed his head. "Of course, my king." Rhaegor Thorne rose from his throne. He was enormous, easily 7 feet tall, shoulders broad as an ox, his presence filling the space like a physical force. But there was something wrong with him, something broken. His movements were stiff, controlled, as if he were constantly fighting against something inside himself. He descended the steps slowly, each footfall echoing through the hall. Kaelira forced herself to stand still, to not run. He stopped in front of her. Up close she could see the scars. They covered every inch of exposed skin, claw marks, bite wounds, burns. His jaw was clenched so tightly she could see the muscles twitch. And his eyes burned with a kind of agony that had no name. "You are afraid," he said. It was not a question. Kaelira swallowed. "Yes?" "Good." He turned away, dismissing her with a gesture. "Take her to the Western Tower. Keep her there." "My king," Vaelric said smoothly, "surely she should be placed in the—" "The Western Tower," Rhaegor repeated, his voice dropping to a growl. "And no one disturbs her. No one." Vaelric's smile did not falter. "As you command." Guards appeared from the shadows and seized Kaelira's arms. She did not resist as they dragged her away, back through the twisting corridors, up spiraling staircases of black stone, higher and higher, until her legs burned and her lungs screamed for air. Finally, they stopped before a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron. One of the guards unlocked it and shoved her inside. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Kaelira stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, and looked around. It was not a cell. It was a chamber. Small, yes, but furnished. A narrow bed, a table, a chair, even a window with thick glass that looked out over the mountains. A fire burned in the hearth, casting weak light across the stone walls. She was not in a dungeon. She was in a cage. Kaelira sank onto the bed and buried her face in her hands, and for the first time since the wolves came for her, she let herself weep. Days passed, then weeks. No one came. Kaelira was alone. Food appeared outside her door every morning: bread, cheese, dried meat, water. She ate mechanically, without tasting. She slept fitfully, plagued by dreams of burning gold eyes and screaming shadows. She paced the room until her feet ached, counting steps, counting stones, counting anything to keep her mind from splintering. She tried the door, locked. She tried the window, barred. She shouted. No one answered. On the 23rd day, she stopped counting. On the 27th, she began to speak aloud. Not to anyone, but simply to hear a human voice. even if it was only her own. She told herself stories, the ones her mother had whispered to her as a child before the sickness took her. Tales of the first wolves, of the wild gods, of heroes who crossed oceans of fire and forests of bone. She spoke until her throat was raw, until the words became a rhythm, a heartbeat, a lifeline. And then, on the 33rd night, the door opened. Kalira jolted upright in bed, heart pounding. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by torchlight, massive, silent, Rhaegor Thorne. He said nothing, did not enter. He simply stood there, staring at her with those terrible, burning eyes. Kalira's voice came out as a whisper. "Why are you here?" For a long moment, he did not answer. Then, "You were speaking." Yes. I tell myself stories to pass the time." His jaw tightened. "Continue." She blinked. "What?" "Tell me a story." It was not a request. Kalira's mind raced. She glanced at the open door, at the guards beyond, at the king's tense, coiled posture. He looked like a man on the edge of breaking. "All right," she said slowly. She sat up straighter, folding her hands in her lap. "There was once a wolf who could not howl." The king's eyes narrowed. She continued. "He was born in the deepest winter, when the moon was dark and the stars had gone silent. The pack said he was cursed. They drove him out into the snow, expecting him to die. But he did not die. He wandered alone through the frozen wastes, searching for something he could not name." Rhaegor stepped into the room. The door remained open behind him. Kalira kept her voice steady. "One night, he came to a cliff overlooking the sea. And there, beneath the waves, he saw a light. A voice rose from the depths, not a howl, but a song. It called to him, and for the first time the wolf understood. He was not broken. He was simply meant for a different kind of voice." Silence filled the room. The king's hands were clenched into fists. His breathing was slow, deliberate, as if he were struggling against some invisible weight. "What happened to him?" Rhaegor asked quietly. Kalira met his gaze. "He learned to sing." For a moment, something flickered in those burning eyes, something almost like a relief. Then it was gone. Rhaegor turned and walked out. The door closed behind him. The lock clicked. Kalira sat in the firelight, trembling, and she realized he had not come to punish her. He had come because he needed her. Yet, after that night, he returned. Not every night, but often enough. He would appear without warning, standing in the doorway, silent as a shadow. And Kalira would tell him stories about wolves and gods and wanderers, about loss and longing and the spaces between stars. She did not know why he wanted them, did not know what haunted him, but she saw the way his shoulders eased when she spoke, the way his breathing slowed, the way the agony in his eyes dulled just a little. And slowly, so slowly she almost did not notice, she began to see him as more than a monster. One night, after she finished a tale about a king who traded his crown for a single moment of peace, Rhaegor spoke. "Why do you not hate me?" Kalira looked up, surprised. I don't know you well enough to hate you." "You should." His voice was rough. "I am the reason you are here, the reason you suffer. You did not start the rebellion. My father did. I crushed it." "Yes." She paused. "But you did not kill him. You could have. You took me instead." Rhaegor's jaw worked. "Do not mistake restraint for mercy." "Then what should I call it?" He had no answer. After a long silence, he said, "Tell me another." And she did. It was Vialaric who shattered the fragile peace. Kalira had been in the fortress for 2 months when she was summoned to the Great Hall. Not dragged, summoned. A servant in black livery appeared at her door with a folded gown and a quiet instruction. "You are to dine with the court tonight." Her stomach dropped. "Why?" "I do not ask questions, miss. Neither should you." The gown was deep blue, trimmed with silver. It fit her perfectly, which made her skin crawl. Someone had been measuring her, watching her. That evening, she was escorted down through the fortress and into the hall she had first entered months ago. But now it was transformed. Long tables filled the space, lined with warriors in black and crimson. Torches blazed. The air smelled of roasted meat and wine. At the head of the hall sat Rhaegor, his throne slightly elevated. To his right sat Vialaric, smiling that cold, cutting smile. Kalira was led to a seat near the king's table, close enough to be seen, far enough to be insignificant. The feast began. She barely touched her food. Around her, the warriors ate and drank and laughed, harsh, bitter sounds. She felt their eyes on her, felt their contempt. Halfway through the meal, Vaelric rose. "My king," he said, voice smooth as silk. "If I may, a toast." Rhaegor said nothing. Vaelric raised his goblet, to alliances forged in blood, to the strength of the pack, and to our king's generosity in accepting Garin Voss's gift. The words were poison wrapped in velvet. Every eye in the hall turned to Caelira. Vaelric continued. "Tell us, girl, what do you bring to this court? What power do you wield? What worth do you offer?" The hall fell silent. Caelira's hands tightened in her lap. She could feel Rhaegor's gaze on her, but she did not look at him. She stood. "I bring nothing," she said clearly. "I have no beast, no power, no strength." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Vaelric's smile widened. Then why? "But I am here," Caelira interrupted, her voice steady. "And I will not apologize for surviving." The murmurs stopped. Rhaegor leaned forward slightly. Vaelric's expression darkened. "Surviving is not enough." The king's voice cut through the hall like a blade. Rhaegor stood. The room seemed to shrink around him. "She is mine," he said, his voice low and final. "My choice. My responsibility. And no one questions that." Vaelric bowed his head, but his eyes glittered with something sharp and dangerous. The feast continued, but the damage was done. As Caelira was led back to her chamber, she felt it, the shift in the air, the tightening of invisible chains. Vaelric had declared war, and she was the battlefield. Wait, that night, Rhaegor came to her door, but he did not ask for a story. He stood in the threshold, breathing hard, his body rigid with barely controlled fury. "You should not have spoken," he said. "I spoke the truth. The truth makes you a target." "I've been a target since I arrived." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. For the first time, she saw him fully, not as a king, but as a man barely holding himself together. "Vaelric will not stop," Rhaegor said quietly. "He sees you as weakness, and he will exploit it." "Then why keep me here?" The question hung in the air. Rhaegor turned away, his hands clenched. "Because when you speak, the pain stops." Caelira's breath caught. He continued, voice raw. "I have been cursed since I was a boy. My wolf is not a beast, it is a ruin. Every day it tears at me from the inside. Every night I fight to keep it caged, and I am losing." He looked at her over his shoulder, eyes burning. "But when you tell your stories, I can breathe." Caelira's heart pounded. She took a step toward him. "Then let me keep telling them," she said softly. Rhaegor shook his head. "You do not understand. If Vaelric learns what you are to me, he will destroy you. He already wants to. Then I cannot protect you." "I don't need protection," Caelira said, her voice firm. "I need a choice." He turned to face her fully. "What choice?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "To stand with you, or to fall alone." For a long moment they stood in the firelight, the weight of the world pressing down on them both. Then Rhaegor did something she had never seen him do. He smiled. It was small, broken, but real. "You are braver than any warrior I have known," he said quietly. "And you," Caelira replied, "are more than your curse." He left without another word. But the next morning, when her breakfast arrived, there was something new on the tray, a single white flower, frost-touched and fragile. And she knew. The war had begun. But this time, she would not fight it alone. The flower changed everything. Caelira kept it in a small clay cup on the windowsill, where the morning light touched it first. It should have withered within days. Frost-touched blooms rarely survived the warmth indoors. But this one persisted, its white petals holding firm against the inevitable. She wondered if it was a message or a warning. In the weeks that followed, Rhaegor's visits became a rhythm. He came late, when the fortress had settled into uneasy silence, and stood just inside her doorway while she spoke. Sometimes he asked for specific stories, tales of exile, of survival, of creatures who learned to live with their scars. Other times he simply listened, his massive frame slowly unwinding as her voice filled the space between them. They did not touch, barely even spoke beyond the stories themselves. But the air between them grew heavier with each passing night, charged with something neither could name. Caelira began to notice things. The way Rhaegor's hands trembled when he first arrived, knuckles white with the effort of control, the way his breathing steadied as she spoke, the tension draining from his shoulders like water from cupped palms. And sometimes, when she reached the end of a tale, she caught him watching her with an expression that was almost peaceful. It never lasted. The moment she stopped speaking, the agony would return, a flicker of gold in his eyes, a tightness in his jaw, the way he would turn and leave without a word, as if afraid of what might happen if he stayed too long. She understood. The curse was not gone. It was simply held at bay, and she was the one holding it. Vaelric noticed. Of course he did. The king's advisor moved through the Black Fortress like smoke, appearing in hallways where he had no business, lingering in doorways, watching with those sharp, calculating eyes. Khalyra had learned to feel his presence before she saw him, a coldness in the air, a prickling at the back of her neck. She avoided him whenever possible, but the fortress was a maze of stone and shadow, and he always seemed to know where she would be. One afternoon, as she descended the spiral staircase from her chamber to the small courtyard where she was occasionally permitted to walk, Vaelric stepped from an alcove directly into her path. Khalyra froze. "My lady," he said smoothly, inclining his head. The title sounded like mockery on his tongue. "How fortuitous! I was hoping we might speak." "I have nothing to say to you." "Ah, but I have much to say to you." He gestured toward the courtyard. "Walk with me." It was not a request. Khalyra's pulse quickened, but she kept her face neutral. She stepped past him and continued down the stairs, feeling him fall into step behind her. They emerged into the courtyard, a small, barren square enclosed by high walls, the ground covered in frost-killed grass. A single dead tree stood in the center, its branches reaching toward the gray sky like skeletal fingers. Vaelric circled her slowly, hands clasped behind his back. "You have become quite the fixture here. The king's storyteller." "I tell stories. He listens. That is all." "Is it?" Vaelric's smile was razor thin. "Forgive me, but I find it difficult to believe that the Alpha King, a warrior who has crushed rebellions and slaughtered armies, requires bedtime tales from a girl with no power." Khalyra met his gaze. "Perhaps you do not know him as well as you think." The smile vanished. Vaelric stopped circling and stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the bitter herbs on his breath. "Let me be clear, child," he said quietly. "I have served Rhaegor Thorne since he was a boy. I have guided him through every war, every treaty, every decision that built this kingdom. I know what he needs, and it is not you." "Then why does he keep me here?" Question I have been asking myself. Vaelric tilted his head, studying her like a predator examining prey. "At first I thought you were simply a curiosity, a broken thing he pitied. But now I wonder if you are something far more dangerous. I am no threat to you. You are a distraction, and distractions make kings weak." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Rhaegor's curse is a tool, girl, a weapon. It keeps him sharp. It keeps him feared. But if he begins to believe he can be saved, if he begins to hope, he will lose the very thing that makes him strong." Khalyra's breath caught. "You want him to suffer. I want him to rule." Vaelric straightened, his expression cold. "And I will not allow a powerless whelp to undo centuries of tradition because she tells pretty stories." He turned and walked away, his crimson robes trailing behind him like blood on snow. Khalyra stood alone in the courtyard, trembling with anger and fear. Vaelric had just declared his intentions, and she had no way to fight him. That night when Rhaegor came to her door, Khalyra did not wait for him to ask. "Vaelric spoke to me today," she said. The king went very still. "What did he say?" "That I am a distraction, that I make you weak." She paused. "That he will not allow me to interfere." Rhaegor's jaw tightened. He had no right. "He is afraid," Khalyra interrupted. "Afraid that you might be more than your curse." "I am my curse." "No." She stood and crossed to where he stood in the doorway. "You are a man fighting a battle no one else can see, and you are winning, one night at a time." Rhaegor looked down at her, his expression raw. "You do not understand what it costs. Every moment I am awake, it tears at me. Every breath is a war. The only time it stops, the only time I feel anything close to silence, is when you speak." His voice cracked on the last word. Khalyra's heart twisted. "Then let me help you." You cannot help me. No one can. Have you tried? She reached out, hesitated, then placed her hand on his arm. His skin was burning hot beneath the fabric of his sleeve, muscles coiled tight as iron cable. Tell me what happened. Tell me how it began. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he spoke. I was 7 years old when the curse took root. My father was king before me, a brutal man, but strong. He believed power was everything. When I did not awaken my wolf by my 6th year, he grew impatient. Bushraziger's voice was flat, distant, as if recounting someone else's story. He brought in shamans, blood mages, anyone who promised results. One of them performed a ritual, forced the awakening. Kaelira's stomach turned. What did they do? They tore my wolf from me before it was ready, before I was ready. His hands clenched into fists. It came out wrong, twisted. It was not a beast, it was a thing of pain and rage, bound to me by agony, and it has been screaming ever since. How long? 23 years. Kaelira's breath left her in a rush. 23 years of constant, unending torment. She could not imagine it, could not comprehend the strength it took to survive even a single day, let alone decades. Why did your father do it? She whispered. Because weakness was unacceptable. Because a king without a wolf was no king at all. Rhaegor's voice dropped to a growl. He died 3 years later. The curse killed him. It has killed everyone who tried to stop it. Not everyone, Kaelira said softly. You are still here. Barely. She tightened her grip on his arm. You are here. You are standing. You are fighting. That is not barely. That is everything. Rhaegor turned to face her fully, and for the first time, she saw something other than pain in his eyes. She saw hope, and it terrified him. If you stay, he said quietly, Vielric will destroy you. He cannot allow you to change me. Then we do not let him know, Kaelira replied. We keep this between us. Your pain, your stories, your silence. He does not get to take that from you. He will find out. He always does. Then we make sure he has nothing to find. Rhaegor stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth lifted in the faintest suggestion of a smile. You are either very brave or very foolish. Can I be both? This time, his smile reached his eyes. Tell me a story, he said. And she did. The next week brought a summons Kaelira had not expected. A servant appeared at her door with a folded piece of parchment sealed with black wax. The message was brief. You are invited to the king's council chamber, tomorrow at midday. Attendance is not optional. Kaelira's stomach dropped. The council chamber was where Rhaegor met with his advisors and warlords, the inner circle of power that ruled the kingdom. She had no business there, no reason to be included, unless Valeric had escalated. She barely slept that night. When morning came, she dressed in the simplest gown she had, gray wool, high-necked, with long sleeves that covered her scarred wrists. She braided her dark hair tightly and scrubbed her face until her skin was raw. If she was walking into a trap, she would do it on her own terms. The council chamber was located deep within the fortress, past guarded corridors and iron doors that required 3 separate keys to unlock. When Kaelira finally arrived, escorted by 2 silent guards, she found herself standing before a massive oak table, surrounded by hard-faced men in black and crimson. Rhaegor sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Valeric sat to his right, smiling. Ah, our guest of honor, Valeric said pleasantly. Do sit, my dear. We have much to discuss. Kaelira hesitated, then took the empty chair at the far end of the table. Every eye in the room was on her. One of the warlords, a scarred brute with a braided beard, leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. This is the tribute? The Voss girl? Indeed, Valeric replied. I thought it prudent to introduce her formally to the council. After all, she has become quite present in the king's daily affairs. Rhaegor's knuckles whitened against the table. Valeric. I mean no disrespect, my king, merely clarification. Valeric gestured toward Kaelira. Tell us, girl, what is your purpose here? What role do you serve in this court? The question was a blade. Kaelira forced herself to breathe. I serve no role. I am here because I was sent. As tribute, yes, a living symbol of her father's failure. Valeric's smile sharpened. But tribute must have value. What value do you bring to the Alpha King? Silence filled the chamber. Kalira could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. These were men who had built their lives on strength, on power, on the law of fang and claw. To them, she was less than nothing. But she had not survived this long by being weak. She lifted her chin and met Valric's gaze. I bring no power, no strength, but I'm still here, and that should tell you something. What should it tell us? One of the warlords sneered. That I am not as easy to break as you think. The warlord's sneer faltered. Valric's expression darkened. Bold words for a girl with no beast. Tell me, what happens when the king tires of you? When he realizes you are nothing but a burden? Enough! Rhaegor's voice cut through the chamber like a thunderclap. He stood, his massive frame casting a shadow across the table. This meeting is over. Valric blinked, feigning surprise. My king, we have not yet... I said it is over. Rhaegor's eyes burned gold. All of you, out. The warlords exchanged glances, then rose and filed toward the door. Valric remained seated, his smile fixed in place. My king, surely we can... Out. The word was a growl. Valric stood slowly, gathering his robes. As he passed Kaelira's chair, he leaned down and whispered, This is not over, girl. Not even close. Then he was gone. The door slammed shut. Kaelira sat frozen, her heart hammering. Rhaegor stood at the head of the table, breathing hard. His hands braced against the wood, as if holding himself upright. You should not have defended me, Kaelira said quietly. I will not let him humiliate you. He is already winning. Every time you react, you prove his point, that I make you weak. Rhaegor turned to face her, his expression raw. You do not make me weak. You make me human. The words hung in the air. Kaelira rose from her chair and crossed to where he stood. Then we need to be smarter. Valric is pushing you toward a breaking point. He wants you to lose control. He wants me to reject you. Yes, and if you do, he wins. If you do not, he will force your hand another way. She paused. We need to show him that I am not a weakness, that I am something he cannot remove. How? Kaelira took a breath. Let me prove my worth. Publicly. Rhaegor frowned. What do you mean? There must be traditions here. Trials. Ways for outsiders to earn their place. She met his gaze. Give me a chance to show them I belong. You have no wolf, no power. They will destroy you. Maybe. But if I succeed, Valric loses his argument, and if I fail... She smiled faintly. At least I will have tried. Rhaegor stared at her, conflict warring across his face. You are asking me to risk your life. I am asking you to trust me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded. There is a right. The trial of the pack. It tests loyalty, cunning, and will. If you survive, the council must recognize you as one of us. And if I do not? His jaw tightened. Then you will not survive. Kaelira squared her shoulders. When? 3 days. At the full moon. Then I will be ready. The next 3 days were agony. Kaelira was given no preparation, no training, no explanation of what the trial would entail. She was simply told to present herself at the central arena on the night of the full moon and to bring nothing but her courage. She spent the time pacing her chamber, running through scenarios in her mind, trying to imagine what horrors awaited her. Would it be combat? A hunt? Some twisted test of endurance? Rhaegor came each night, but he did not ask for stories. Instead, he sat in silence, watching her with those burning eyes, his presence both a comfort and a torment. On the final night, he spoke. You do not have to do this. Yes, I do. Kaelira, I need to know if I can survive here. Not as your... whatever I am, but as myself. She turned to face him. I need to know if I am more than what they say I am. Rhaegor rose and crossed to where she stood. He towered over her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. You are already more than they will ever understand, he said quietly. And then, for the first time, he reached out and touched her. His hand, massive, scarred, burning, cupped the side of her face with a gentleness that took her breath away. Do not die, he whispered. Kaelira leaned into his touch, just for a moment. I will not, she promised. The trial of the pack began at midnight. The arena was an open circle carved into the mountainside, surrounded by stone benches where the court gathered to watch. Torches burned along the perimeter, casting flickering shadows across the frozen ground. Above, the full moon hung bloated and red, as if the sky itself was bleeding. Kalira stood in the center of the circle, dressed in leather armor that did not fit and boots that pinched her feet. Around her, the court watched in silence. Warlords, advisors, servants, all of them waiting to see her fail. Veilric stood at the edge of the arena, his smile sharp as broken glass. Rhaegor sat on a raised platform, his expression carved from stone. A horn blew. From the far side of the arena, 3 massive wolves emerged from the shadows. They were not dire wolves. They were cursed things, twisted and wrong, their fur matted with scabs, their eyes glowing sickly yellow. Foam dripped from their jaws. The crowd murmured. Someone laughed. Kalira's blood turned to ice. The wolves circled her, growling low in their throats. "Survive until dawn," Veilric called out, "or die trying." The first wolf lunged. Kalira threw herself sideways, hitting the ground hard. Pain exploded in her shoulder, but she rolled to her feet, gasping. The wolf's jaws snapped shut on empty air. The second wolf came from behind. She heard the scrape of claws on stone and spun, barely avoiding teeth that would have torn out her throat. She had no weapon, no power, nothing but her wits and her will. The third wolf crouched, preparing to strike. Kalira did the only thing she could think of. She started talking. "You were not always this," she said, her voice cutting through the growls. "You were pack once. You had names. You had purpose." The wolves paused. "Someone did this to you, twisted you, broke you, but you are still here." One of the wolves tilted its head, yellow eyes narrowing. Kalira kept speaking, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "I know what it is to be broken, to be told you are worthless, to be cast out." The wolves circled closer, but they did not attack. "But you are not your wounds. You are not your curse. You are still wolves, and wolves do not kneel to fear." The largest wolf stopped directly in front of her. Its breath was hot and rank, its teeth stained with old blood. Kalira met its gaze. "I see you, she whispered. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then the wolf lowered its head. The other 2 followed. The crowd erupted. Kalira sank to her knees, shaking with exhaustion and disbelief. The wolves sat around her like silent guardians, their yellow eyes watching the arena. Veilric's face had gone white. Rhaegor stood, his expression unreadable, and in that moment, Kalira knew. She had just won something far more dangerous than survival. She had won their attention. She had won their attention. And attention, Kalira learned in the days that followed, was the most dangerous thing she could possess. The fortress transformed around her, where once she had moved through its corridors like a ghost, unseen, unacknowledged. Now eyes followed her everywhere. Servants whispered as she passed. Warriors watched her with expressions ranging from grudging respect to outright hostility. Even the air felt different, charged with an electricity that made her skin prickle. Veilric's rage was a palpable thing. He no longer smiled when he saw her, no longer bothered with pleasantries or veiled threats. He simply watched, his dark eyes calculating, waiting for the moment she would slip. Rhaegor withdrew. That hurt more than anything else. After the trial, he stopped coming to her chamber, stopped asking for stories. When they passed in the halls, rare occasions, carefully orchestrated by invisible hands, he did not meet her eyes. His jaw remained locked, his massive frame rigid with the same terrible control she had seen the night they first met. She understood why. The court was watching. Veilric was watching. Any sign of favor, any hint of connection between them would be weaponized immediately. But understanding did not make the loneliness easier to bear. On the 5th night after her trial, unable to sleep, Kalira descended the tower stairs and wandered toward the fortress library, a cavernous room filled with ancient texts and scrolls that smelled of dust and forgotten time. She had discovered it weeks ago, a sanctuary where no one bothered her. Tonight, she found she was not alone. Rhaegor stood before one of the tall windows, silhouetted against the moonlight. His shoulders were hunched, his hands braced against the stone sill as if holding himself upright. Even from across the room, she could see the tension radiating through him. "You should not be here," he said without turning. Kalira closed the door behind her. Neither should you. I cannot sleep. Neither can I. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The library was so quiet she could hear his breathing, slow, deliberate, the rhythm of a man fighting for control. The trial was a mistake, Rhaegor said finally. I should never have allowed it. I survived. Barely. And now you have made yourself a target for every wolf in this fortress who wants to prove they are stronger than a powerless girl. He turned to face her, and she saw the exhaustion carved into his features. Vaelric has already begun spreading rumors that you used sorcery, that the wolves were drugged, that the trial was rigged. Let him talk. You do not understand. Rhaegor's voice dropped to a growl. He is building a case. Piece by piece, he is constructing a narrative that will justify removing you. And when he has enough support from the council, he will strike. Kaelira crossed the room until she stood directly in front of him. Then we strike first. With what? You have no power. I have no proof. All we have are words and shadows. Sometimes that is enough. Rhaegor looked down at her, his golden eyes burning with something that might have been desperation. I cannot protect you from what is coming. The curse is getting worse. Every day it tears deeper. The only time it quiets is when... He stopped abruptly. When I speak, Kaelira finished softly. His jaw clenched. Yes. Then let me speak now. It is not safe. If someone sees us, I do not care. She reached out and placed her hand on his chest, feeling the rapid thunder of his heartbeat beneath her palm. You are suffering. I can help. Let me. For a heartbeat, she thought he would refuse, would push her away and disappear into the fortress like smoke. Instead, he covered her hand with his own, massive, burning, trembling. Tell me, he whispered. Tell me anything. So she did. She told him about the ocean she had never seen, about ships that sailed beyond the edge of the world and returned carrying stories in their holds. She told him about gardens that grew in the hearts of mountains, watered by underground rivers that sang in languages older than wolves. She spoke until the tension drained from his shoulders, until his breathing slowed, until the gold in his eyes faded to something almost human. And when she finally fell silent, he did not let go of her hand. I am losing, he said quietly. The curse is winning. One day soon, I will not be able to hold it back. You have held it for 23 years. You're stronger than you know. I am tired. The word came out broken. I am so tired of fighting. Kaelira tightened her grip. Then let me fight with you. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. Then he leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. They stood like that in the moonlight, two broken things holding each other upright, until the first bells of dawn rang through the fortress. The summons came 3 days later. Not for Kaelira this time, for everyone. The entire court was ordered to assemble in the Great Hall for what Vaelric called a matter of grave importance regarding the stability of the crown. The announcement sent ripples of tension through the fortress. Warlords gathered in tight clusters, muttering. Servants hurried through corridors with frightened eyes. Something was coming. Kaelira dressed carefully that morning, choosing the blue gown she had worn to her first feast, the one that made her feel like she was wearing armor instead of silk. She braided her hair into a crown around her head and scrubbed her face until her cheeks were raw. When she descended to the great hall, she found it packed with bodies. Every wolf in the fortress seemed to have gathered. Warriors in black leather, advisors in crimson robes, even the lowest servants pressed against the walls. At the far end of the hall, Rhaegor sat on his throne, his expression carved from granite. Vaelric stood before him, dressed in robes of deepest black embroidered with silver thread. In his hands, he held a wooden box. Kaelira's stomach clenched. My king, Vaelric began, his voice carrying through the hall. Members of the court, I have called you here today because I can no longer remain silent about a matter that threatens the very foundation of our kingdom. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Vaelric opened the box and withdrew a vial of dark liquid. For weeks, I have watched as our king has grown distracted, as his attention has turned away from the strength and unity of the pack and toward... He paused, his gaze sliding to Kaelira. Other concerns. The crowd shifted, eyes turning toward her. At first, I believed this was a temporary fascination, a moment of weakness that would pass. But it has become clear that something far more sinister is at work. Valeric held up the vial. This was found in the tribute girl's chamber, a tincture of moonsbane and shadowroot, substances used in dark rituals to cloud the mind and bend the will. The hall erupted. Kaelira's blood turned to ice. That is a lie. Silence! Valeric's voice cracked like a whip. You will speak when spoken to, witch. I am no witch. Then explain this. He thrust the vial toward her. Explain why it was found hidden beneath your bed, wrapped in cloth, inscribed with binding runes. I have never seen that vial in my life. But the crowd was not listening. They were shouting now, voices overlapping in a cacophony of rage and fear. Someone screamed, "Sorcery!" Another yelled, "Burn her!" Rhaegor remained silent, his knuckles white against the arms of his throne. Valeric raised his hand, and the hall slowly quieted. I take no pleasure in this revelation. But the evidence is clear. This girl, this powerless, soulless creature, has been using dark magic to manipulate our king, to weaken him, to corrupt him from within. That is not true, Kaelira said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. I have no magic, no power. I am exactly what I appear to be. Then how do you explain the wolves? A warlord shouted from the crowd. How do you explain surviving the trial when any normal girl would have been torn apart? I spoke to them, that is all. Words do not tame cursed beasts. They do if the beasts still remember what it means to be more than their curse. The hall fell silent. Kaelira's heart hammered against her ribs, but she did not look away from the warlord. You want to believe I am a witch because it is easier than accepting the truth, that your cursed wolves responded to compassion instead of fear, that survival does not always require claws and teeth, that maybe, just maybe, you have all been so focused on strength that you forgot what it means to be human. Valeric's face darkened. Enough of this. My king, I demand she be tried for sorcery and conspiracy against the crown. Still, Rhaegor said nothing. Kaelira turned to face him, her voice shaking. You know this is false. You know I have done nothing wrong. His golden eyes met hers, and in them she saw something that broke her heart. Doubt. Not doubt about her innocence. Doubt about whether he could save her. The evidence is compelling, Rhaegor said slowly, each word sounding like it was dragged from his throat. It must be investigated. Kaelira's world tilted. Valeric smiled. A wise decision, my king. I propose we conduct a sacred trial, the right of truth. Let the old gods judge her. If she is innocent, they will spare her. If guilty, he shrugged. Then justice will be served. No, Kaelira whispered, but the court was already roaring its approval. The rite of truth was scheduled for the following night during the dark moon. When the barrier between worlds grew thin and the old gods, it was said, could see into mortal hearts, Kaelira was locked in her chamber under guard. No visitors, no food, no water. She was to enter the trial pure and empty, whatever that meant. She spent the day pacing, her mind racing through possibilities. The vial had been planted, that much was obvious. But by whom? Valeric was the likely culprit, but he would have needed help. Someone with access to her chamber. Someone she had not suspected. As night fell, the door opened. Kaelira spun, expecting guards. Instead, she found herself face to face with a young servant girl, no more than 14, with wide, frightened eyes. I should not be here, the girl whispered. But I had to tell you, I am sorry, I am so sorry. Kaelira's breath caught. You planted the vial. The girl nodded, tears streaming down her face. Lord Valeric said he would kill my mother if I did not. He gave me the box and told me to hide it beneath your bed. I did not know what it was for. I swear I did not know. It is all right, Kaelira said, though her voice shook. I understand. He is going to kill you tomorrow. The rite is rigged. There is something in the circle, a poison, that will trigger when you step inside. You will die, and they will say the gods judged you guilty. The girl grabbed Kaelira's hands. You have to run, please, before it is too late. I cannot run. If I do, they will hunt me down, and Valeric will find another way to destroy anyone who stands in his way. Then what will you do? Kaelira looked toward the window, where the dark moon hung invisible in the sky. I will face the trial, and I will tell the truth. The truth will not save you. Maybe not, but it is all I have. The girl left in tears, and Kaelira stood alone in the darkness, her heart pounding. She had one chance. One desperate, impossible chance. If the trial was rigged, she would have to find a way to turn it against Valric, and the only person who might help her was the one person who had not spoken a single word in her defense, Rhaegor. The guards came for her at midnight. They dragged her from her chamber and down through the fortress, past silent corridors and locked doors, until they emerged into an open courtyard she had never seen before. It was circular, carved directly into the mountain stone, surrounded by towering walls. At its center stood a raised platform covered in ancient runes that glowed faintly in the darkness. The court had gathered in the shadows, hundreds of them, watching with hungry eyes. Varric stood beside the platform, dressed in ceremonial robes. "Bring her forward." Kaelira was shoved toward the platform. As she climbed the steps, she felt it, a wrongness in the air, thick and oily, that made her skin crawl. The servant girl had been right. The circle was poisoned. "Kaelira Voss," Valric intoned, "you stand accused of sorcery and conspiracy. Do you accept the judgment of the old gods?" She wanted to scream, to refuse, to run. Instead, she lifted her chin. "I accept." "Then step into the circle and speak your truth. If you are innocent, the gods will spare you. If guilty," he smiled, "they will deliver justice." Kaelira looked past him, searching the crowd for Rhaegor. She found him standing at the edge of the courtyard, half hidden in shadow. Their eyes met, and in that moment she made a choice. "I will speak my truth," she said loudly, "but not to the gods. To you." Valric frowned. "What? You want to know if I have power?" Kaelira turned to face the crowd. "I do not. You want to know if I used magic to manipulate your king? I did not. But I did do something far more dangerous." The courtyard fell silent. I reminded him that he is more than a monster, that his curse does not define him, that he is capable of compassion, of restraint, of choosing who he wants to be instead of accepting what he was forced to become. Her voice grew stronger. "And that terrifies you, all of you. Because if your king can be more than his curse, then maybe you can be more than your fear." "Enough," Valric snarled. "Step into the circle, or you will what? Force me? Prove to everyone here that this trial is exactly what I say it is. A sham designed to remove anyone who threatens your control?" Valric's face twisted with rage. "You dare! I dare because I have nothing left to lose." Kaelira turned back to Rhaegor, her voice breaking. "You asked me once why I do not hate you. I will tell you now. Because you are the only person in this fortress who sees me as something other than broken. And I see you the same way." Rhaegor's expression cracked. Valric moved with sudden, vicious speed. He grabbed Kaelira by the arm and dragged her toward the circle. "If you will not walk, then you will be thrown." A sound split the air. Yes. A roar that was not animal, not human, but something caught between, a scream of agony and rage that shook the very stones beneath their feet. Rhaegor staggered forward, his body convulsing. Black veins spread across his skin like cracks in glass. His eyes blazed gold, then black, then something else entirely. A void that swallowed light. The crowd scattered, screaming. Valric released Kaelira and stumbled backward. "What?" Rhaegor's form began to shift. His armor split and fell away as his body expanded, bones cracking and reforming, muscles tearing and rebuilding themselves into something monstrous. Fur the color of smoke erupted across his skin. His face elongated into a muzzle filled with teeth like shattered obsidian. Claws burst from his fingertips, each one as long as a dagger. But it was his eyes that held the true horror. They were empty, hungry, lost. The curse had finally won. Kaelira stood frozen as the creature that had been Rhaegor Thorn rose to its full height, 12 feet of twisted shadow and rage, its form flickering between solid and smoke, as if it could not decide whether it belonged to this world or another. It threw back its head and screamed. Warriors rushed forward, weapons drawn. The creature swatted them aside like insects, sending bodies flying into walls with sickening crunches. Blood sprayed across the stone. Screams filled the air. Valric backed away, his face white with terror. "Kill it! Kill the beast before it destroys us all!" But Kaelira did not run. She walked forward, toward the monster, toward the thing that everyone said could not be saved. "Rhaegor!" she called out, her voice somehow cutting through the chaos. "I know you can hear me." The creature's head swiveled toward her, its void black eyes fixed on her with terrible focus. "Do not do this," Baelric screamed. "You will die." Kaelira ignored him. She took another step, then another, until she stood directly in front of the creature. It towered over her, its breath hot and rank, its claws flexing. "You are not this," she said quietly. "You are not the curse. You are the man who sits in doorways listening to stories, the king who defended me when he did not have to, the wolf who learned to choose restraint over destruction." The creature snarled, saliva dripping from its jaws. Kaelira reached out slowly and placed her hand on its chest, right over where a human heart would be. "Come back," she whispered. "Please, come back to me." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the creature went very, very still. Its breathing slowed. The black void in its eyes flickered, and for just a moment she saw a flash of gold. Human. "That is it," Kaelira breathed. "You are still in there. You are still—" The creature lunged, not at her, past her, straight toward Baelric. Straight toward Baelric. The advisor's scream cut through the courtyard as the shadow beast bore down on him, claws extended, jaws wide enough to swallow a man whole. Warriors shouted, weapons clattered, but no one was fast enough. Except Kaelira. She threw herself forward, not away from the creature but into its path, her arms spread wide. "Stop!" The word was not a plea, it was a command. The beast skidded to a halt mere inches from her, its momentum sending a spray of gravel across the stone. Its massive head swung down toward her, void black eyes meeting hers. She could smell the wrongness radiating from it, rot and smoke, and something ancient that had no name. Behind her, Baelric scrambled backward, his crimson robes tangled around his legs. Kaelira kept her arms outstretched, creating a barrier between predator and prey. "Look at me," she said, her voice somehow steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "Not him. Me." The creature's head tilted, confusion rippling across its monstrous features. "If you kill him now, you prove everything they have ever said about you, that you are nothing but a monster, that the curse owns you, that you have no choice." She took a breath. "But I know that is a lie. I have seen you choose restraint every single night when you stood in my doorway fighting against the pain. You are still choosing now. I know you are." The beast's breathing was ragged, uneven, each exhale rattling with something that might have been words or might have been screams. "Rhaegor," Kaelira whispered, "come back to me." For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the creature's form flickered. Smoke became flesh, then smoke again. Its claws retracted slightly. The void in its eyes pulsed with a faint golden light, and it stepped backward. The courtyard erupted in chaos. Warriors surged forward, weapons raised. Someone shouted for archers. Another voice screamed for retreat. But Kaelira did not move. She stood between the beast and the crowd, arms still outstretched. "Put down your weapons," she commanded, her voice cutting through the panic. "Are you insane?" one of the warlords roared. "That thing will kill us all." "That thing is your king." She turned to face them, and for the first time since arriving at the Black Fortress, she felt the full weight of her own power. Not the power of claws or teeth, but the power of absolute conviction. "And if any of you strike him, you will have to go through me first." A scarred warrior with a spear stepped forward. "You would die for a monster?" "He is not a monster. He is cursed, and there is a difference." "The difference does not matter if he tears your throat out." "Then that is my choice to make." Kaelira's gaze swept across the assembled wolves, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "All my life I have been told I am worthless because I have no beast, no power, no strength. But I am still standing here. And your king, your cursed, suffering king, has chosen not to kill me, has chosen restraint over destruction again and again when every instinct in his body screams for blood. If that is not strength, then you do not understand the meaning of the word." Silence fell across the courtyard. Behind her, the beast made a sound, low, rumbling, almost like a whimper. Kaelira slowly turned back to face it. The creature had sunk to its haunches, its massive form trembling. Black smoke leaked from its skin like blood from a wound. She took a step toward it. "Do not," someone whispered from the crowd. She took another step, then another. When she was close enough to touch it, she knelt and placed both hands on the creature's scarred, smoke-wreathed chest. "I am here," she said softly. "You are not alone." The beast's eyes closed, and slowly, so slowly it seemed impossible, it began to shrink. The transformation was not graceful. Bones cracked and reformed with sounds like breaking branches. Fur retracted into skin, leaving raw patches. Claws dissolved into trembling human fingers. The creature convulsed, collapsed forward, and Kaelira caught its weight as best she could, her small frame buckling beneath the mass of a man who had been a monster seconds before. Rhaegor Thorne fell to his hands and knees, gasping for breath, his body covered in sweat and blood and ash. His eyes were gold again, human gold, not the burning void, but they were filled with a horror that went deeper than any physical wound. "What have I done?" he rasped. "You stopped," Kaelira whispered, her hand on his shoulder. "That is what you did. You stopped." Rhaegor looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw something break. Not the curse, but the belief that he was beyond saving. Around them, the courtyard remained frozen in silence. Then Valric's voice shattered the moment. "Seize him!" Warriors moved immediately, decades of training overriding shock. They surged forward with chains and binding runes, moving to restrain their fallen king. "No!" Kaelira shouted, throwing herself across Rhaegor's body. "Move aside, girl," a warlord commanded. "He is too dangerous to— He is your king! He is cursed! So bind the curse, not the man!" Kaelira's voice cracked with desperation. "You have seen him fight it. You have seen him choose control. If you chain him like an animal, you take away the only weapon he has against it, his will." Valric stepped forward, his face twisted with rage and something that looked almost like fear. "She is protecting him because she is complicit. The vile, the dark magic. It was all designed to weaken him, to make him lose control. She is the one who triggered this transformation." "That is a lie," Kaelira spat. "Is it? Explain then how the king has suddenly lost control after months of stability. Explain why his curse erupted the moment you were threatened." Valric turned to address the crowd. "She has been poisoning him with her words, her presence, her— Enough!" The word came from Rhaegor. He had managed to push himself upright, kneeling now, his body still trembling but his voice steady. "Lord Valric," he said quietly, "you will stop speaking." Valric's mouth snapped shut. Rhaegor slowly rose to his feet. Kaelira stood with him, her hand gripping his arm for support, though she could not tell if she was steadying him or if he was steadying her. The king looked across the assembled court, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 23 years of suffering held at bay. "I lost control tonight, that is true, but it was not because of sorcery or manipulation." He paused, his jaw tightening. "It was because I have been fighting this curse alone for so long that I forgot what it felt like to have something worth protecting." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "For years, I have ruled through fear, through strength, through the very curse that has been tearing me apart. I convinced myself that suffering made me strong, that pain was the price of power." Rhaegor's golden eyes found Kaelira's. "And then this girl, this powerless, impossible girl, showed me that strength is not the absence of weakness. It is the choice to keep fighting even when you are breaking." Valric's face had gone white. "My king, you are not yourself. I am more myself than I have been in decades." Rhaegor turned to face his advisor. "Tell me, Valric, who had access to the tribute's chamber? Who could have planted the vial without being questioned?" That is not— Who has spent years ensuring I remain isolated? Who has convinced me again and again that my curse is my greatest weapon?" Rhaegor's voice dropped to a growl. "Who benefits most from my suffering?" The courtyard went deathly silent. Valric drew himself up, his aristocratic features hardening. "I have served you faithfully since you were a child. Everything I have done has been for the strength of this kingdom." "No," Rhaegor stepped forward. "Everything you have done has been to maintain your own power. You need me cursed. You need me suffering, because a king who is whole does not need an advisor to rule for him. This is madness. She has poisoned your mind. She has saved my life." Rhaegor's voice rang through the courtyard. "Night after night, when the curse was tearing me apart, she gave me something no potion or spell ever could— peace. And you saw that as a threat." Valric's mask finally cracked. His smooth, calculated expression twisted into something ugly and desperate. "You think you can survive without me? You think this broken girl can give you what I have given you? Power, respect, fear?" "I do not want fear anymore," Rhaegor said quietly. I want to be able to wake up without wishing I had died in the night. I want to look at my own hands without seeing only weapons. I want... He trailed off, then finished simply. I want to be more than my curse. The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. Valric's face went through a series of rapid transformations, shock, rage, calculation, before settling on cold contempt. You are weak, and weakness will destroy this kingdom. Then let it be destroyed. Rhaegar turned to address the assembled warriors and advisors. I'm giving you all a choice. You can follow me as I try to build something better than what we have been, or you can leave. I will not force you to stay. No one moved. Then from somewhere in the crowd, a young warrior stepped forward. He could not have been more than 20, his armor still bright and unscratched. He knelt. I will follow you, my king. Another warrior joined him, then another. Within moments, half the courtyard was on its knees. But not everyone knelt. A cluster of older warlords remained standing, their expressions hard. One of them, the scarred brute with the braided beard who had questioned Kylera at the council, spoke. We need more than words, boy king. We need proof that you can control the curse, that it will not consume you the next time you lose your temper. Rhaegar nodded slowly. You are right. Words are not enough. He turned and walked to the center of the courtyard, to the raised platform where Kylera had nearly been forced into Valric's poisoned circle. The runes still glowed faintly, pulsing with dark energy. This circle, Rhaegar said, gesturing toward it. What was it designed to do? Valric said nothing. One of the servants, the same young girl who had warned Kylera, stepped forward hesitantly. It was meant to trigger a reaction, to force the accused's true nature to reveal itself. By poisoning them, Kylera said. The girl nodded, tears streaming down her face. Lord Valric said it would only harm the guilty, that if she was innocent, she would survive. But everyone who steps into that circle would die, Rhaegar said. It was not a question. The girl sobbed. Yes. Rhaegar looked at Valric. You were going to murder her, frame it as divine judgment, and then what? Comfort me in my grief while you tightened your control? Valric's expression was stone. Guards, Rhaegar commanded. Take him. 3 warriors moved forward and seized Valric by the arms. He did not struggle, but his eyes burned with cold fury. This is a mistake, he said quietly. Without me, you will fall. The curse will consume you, and when it does, there will be no one left to stop it. Then I will face that when it comes, Rhaegar replied. But I will do it on my own terms. As Valric was dragged away, the old warlord with the braided beard stepped forward again. You say you can control the curse. Prove it. Rhaegar met his gaze. How? Step into the circle. The courtyard went silent. Kylera's heart stopped. No, absolutely not. That circle is designed to kill, which is precisely why he must do it, the warlord interrupted. If the king can walk into a cursed circle designed to reveal true nature and emerge whole, then we will believe he has mastery over his affliction. If not, he shrugged. Then Lord Valric was right, and we need a new king. Rhaegar stared at the circle, his jaw working. The runes pulsed like a diseased heartbeat, their light casting sickly shadows across the stone. Do not do this, Kylera whispered. Please, there has to be another way. There is not. Rhaegar turned to her, and she saw the exhaustion carved into every line of his face. They need to know I am stronger than the curse, that I can be trusted. He paused. I need to know it too. Before she could stop him, he walked toward the circle. Every instinct in Kylera's body screamed at her to run forward, to drag him back, to throw herself between him and whatever horrors waited in that ring of poisoned stone. But she forced herself to stand still. This was his choice, his battle. All she could do was bear witness. Rhaegar stopped at the edge of the circle. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and stepped inside. The runes exploded with light. Black energy erupted from the stone, wrapping around Rhaegar's body like living chains. He gasped, his back arching, his hands clenching into fists. The curse responded immediately, veins of shadow spreading across his skin, his eyes blazing gold, then black, then gold again. The crowd watched in horrified silence as their king fought against forces both outside and within. Kylera could see the moment he began to lose. His form started to shift, bones cracking, muscles expanding. The shadow beast was rising again, triggered by the circle's poison, fed by decades of accumulated agony. She could not stand it any longer. "Rhaegor," she shouted, "listen to me!" His head turned toward her, barely human anymore. "You are not alone in this," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You have never been alone. Even when you thought you were, even when the curse screamed that you were worthless and broken and beyond saving, you were wrong." The transformation slowed. "I see you," Kalira continued, walking slowly toward the circle despite the warning shouts from the crowd. "Not the king, not the curse. You. The man who sits in doorways listening to stories because it is the only thing that makes the pain stop. The man who defended me when he had every reason not to. The man who is fighting right now, this very second, because he refuses to be defined by what was done to him." She stopped at the edge of the circle, just outside the barrier of poisoned light. "Come back," she whispered. "Not for them. For me." Rhaegor's eyes locked onto hers, and he made a choice. The shadows receded. The beast retreated. His form stabilized, human once more, though every muscle trembled with the effort of control. He stood in the center of the circle, wreathed in black energy, and did not fall. The runes pulsed once, twice, then went dark. Rhaegor stepped out of the circle. The courtyard exploded with sound, cheers, shouts, the clash of weapons against shields in salute. Warriors who had remained standing knelt. Even the old warlord with the braided beard lowered his head in acknowledgement. Rhaegor swayed, and Kaelira rushed forward to catch him before he fell. He was burning hot, his skin slick with sweat, his breathing ragged. "You did it," she breathed. "You actually did it." "I would not have," he replied quietly, "without you." She helped him toward the edge of the courtyard, where servants rushed forward with water and clean cloths. As they lowered him onto a stone bench, the old warlord approached. "You have proven your strength, my king. The curse does not own you." He paused. "But what of the girl? She is still powerless, still soulless. The pack will never accept. Then the pack will change." Rhaegor's voice was firm despite his exhaustion. "Kaelira Voss is not a prisoner, not a tribute, not a tool. She is—" He looked at her, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "She is mine, by choice, and I am hers." The warlord's expression was unreadable. "You would make her your queen? I would make her my equal." Murmurs rippled through the crowd again, but this time they carried a different tone. Not outrage, not mockery, uncertainty. Which was, Kaelira realized, the first step toward acceptance. The warlord studied them both for a long moment. Then slowly, he knelt again. "Then we will follow you both," he said, "and may the old gods have mercy on anyone who tries to stop us." As the courtyard slowly emptied, warriors dispersing to spread word of what had happened, Kaelira helped Rhaegor to his feet. "Can you walk?" she asked. "Barely." "Then lean on me." He did, and together they made their way through the fortress, back toward the tower where this had all begun. Servants and guards watched them pass with wide eyes, but no one tried to stop them. When they finally reached Kaelira's chamber, Rhaegor collapsed onto the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. "I almost lost," he said quietly. "In the circle. I felt it taking over. I felt myself slipping. But you did not slip. Only because you pulled me back." He looked up at her. "What happens the next time? What happens when you are not there?" Kaelira sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Then you hold on to the memory of this moment. The moment you chose to come back. The moment you proved that the curse does not define you. It will never stop, you know. The pain, the struggle. Every day will be a battle." "I know. And you would still choose to stand beside me?" She turned to face him fully, meeting his golden eyes without flinching. "Every single day." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Rhaegor reached out and took her hand, carefully, gently, as if afraid he might break her. "I do not deserve you," he said. "You do not get to decide that. I do." She squeezed his hand. "And I am choosing you, curse and all." Something in his expression cracked open. He pulled her close, and she let him, wrapping her arms around his massive frame and holding on as tightly as she could. They stayed like that for a long time, two broken things finding strength in each other. When they finally pulled apart, dawn was breaking through the window, painting the room in shades of gold and pink. "What happens now?" Kaelira asked. Rhaegor stood, wincing slightly, and walked to the window. He looked out over the fortress, his kingdom, the mountains that had been his prison for so long. Now, he said quietly, we build something new. A kingdom where strength is not measured by the absence of weakness, but by the courage to keep fighting despite it. Where broken things are not cast aside, but given the chance to prove their worth. That will not be easy. No, but nothing worth doing ever is. He turned back to her, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something in his eyes that looked almost like peace. Will you help me? He asked. Kalira smiled. I thought you would never ask. As they stood together watching the sun rise over the Black Fortress, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the courtyard below. Veilric had escaped his guards, and his eyes burned with the promise of revenge, The guards found the empty cell an hour after dawn. Chains lay broken on the floor, the iron links twisted as if by inhuman strength. The stone wall bore deep gouges, claw marks that should not have been possible for a man without a wolf. But Veilric had always been more than he appeared. The alarm bells rang through the Black Fortress, their urgent clang sending warriors scrambling to defensive positions. Rhaegor was in the war room when the news reached him, surrounded by maps and advisors who were still adjusting to the idea of serving a king who asked for their counsel instead of simply commanding obedience. The old warlord with the braided beard, his name was Torvin, Kalira had learned, slammed his fist on the table. How does an advisor escape a locked cell guarded by 3 of our best warriors? Magic, one of the younger advisors suggested nervously. He must have been hiding his power all along. Or he had help, Rhaegor said quietly. His golden eyes were dark with exhaustion. He had not slept since the trial, but his voice remained steady. Veilric has served in this fortress for 30 years. He knows every corridor, every secret passage, every person who owes him a favor. Then we search the entire fortress, Torvin growled. Tear it apart stone by stone if we have to. No. Rhaegor straightened, his massive frame filling the space. That is what he wants, to scatter our forces, create chaos, make us look weak in front of the other clans. He paused. Veilric is not done. He will make one more move, and when he does, we will be ready. Kalira stood near the window, listening but not speaking. She had been included in the War Council, another change that had sent ripples through the fortress, but she was still learning when to offer her voice and when to remain silent. She was also learning that leadership was exhausting. In the 3 days since the trial, she and Rhaegor had been working dawn to dusk reshaping the kingdom's laws, removing edicts that punished weakness, creating protections for those without wolves, establishing councils where grievances could be heard instead of silenced. Every change met resistance. Every reform sparked arguments that lasted hours. But slowly, grudgingly, the fortress was beginning to shift. Not everyone was happy about it. As the War Council continued debating search strategies, a servant burst through the door, her face white with terror. My king! The southern watchtower? There is smoke. Everyone froze. Rhaegor moved first, crossing to the window and throwing it open. Sure enough, a thick column of black smoke rose from the direction of the southern wall, dark against the pale morning sky. Torvin, take 50 warriors and secure the tower, Rhaegor commanded. If this is a diversion, it is not a diversion. The voice came from the doorway. Veilric stood there, flanked by 6 warriors in unmarked black armor. His crimson robes were gone, replaced by battle leathers that made him look less like an advisor and more like what he truly was, a predator. It is a declaration, he continued, stepping into the room. The warriors at his back moved with him, hands on their weapons. The old order is burning, and from its ashes I will build something stronger. Rhaegor's hand went to the sword at his hip. You are under arrest for conspiracy and attempted murder. By whose authority? A cursed king who can barely control his own beast? A broken girl with no power? Veilric's smile was cold. You have lost the support of the true wolves, Rhaegor. The ones who remember what strength means, what sacrifice requires. Then why are you here? Kalira asked quietly. If you have already won, why come back? Veilric's gaze shifted to her, and she saw something dark and hungry in his eyes. Because I want you to see what you have destroyed. I want you to watch as everything you tried to build crumbles, and then I want you to beg for the mercy I will not give. He raised his hand, and the 6 warriors drew their weapons. But before anyone could move, Torven's voice roared from behind Veilric. Drop your blades! The old warlord stood in the corridor with 24 armed warriors, their spears leveled at Valric's small group. Valric did not even turn. Ah, Torvin, I wondered when you would arrive. Tell me, how many of these loyal warriors do you think will actually follow you once they learn the truth? What truth? Torvin demanded. That your precious king is dying. Valric's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire room. The curse is killing him, slowly, painfully, inevitably. I have seen it happen to every member of his bloodline who carried the affliction. His father lasted 5 years after the transformation. His grandfather, 3. Rhaegor has held on for 23 years through sheer stubbornness and my guidance. But now that he jerked his chin toward Kylira, has convinced him to embrace his humanity, the curse will consume him faster than ever. You are lying, Rhaegor said. Am I? Valric finally turned to face him. Tell them then. Tell them how the pain has been getting worse. How the beast rises closer to the surface with each passing day. How many more times do you think you can hold it back before you fail? Silence filled the war room. Kylira felt her heart drop as she saw the truth written across Rhaegor's face. The exhaustion, the trembling hands he tried to hide, the way he gripped the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. It is true, Rhaegor said quietly. The curse is getting stronger. Murmurs rippled through the assembled warriors. But that does not mean I am giving up, Rhaegor continued, his voice growing stronger. It means I need to find a way to break it, permanently. There is no way to break it, Valric snarled. Do you think I did not spend years searching? Your father hired every shaman, every blood mage, every charlatan in the 5 kingdoms. None of them could stop it. The curse is woven into your very bones. You can manage it, control it, use it, but you cannot destroy it. Then I will be the first. You will be dead within the year. Rhaegor met his former advisor's gaze. Then I will spend that year building something worth dying for. For a moment, something flickered across Valric's face, an emotion Kylira could not quite name, grief perhaps, or regret. Then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. So be it, Valric said. He turned to address the warriors behind Torvin. I offer you all a choice. Follow a dying king and his powerless queen into oblivion. Or join me in restoring the old ways, strength, power, survival of the fittest. No one moved. Valric's expression darkened. You hesitate now, but when your king falls, and he will fall, you will remember this moment. You will remember that I tried to save you. He raised his hand again, and this time Kylira saw the flash of something metallic. A blade. Small, wickedly curved, glinting with an oily sheen that suggested poison. Valric moved with impossible speed, lunging not at Rhaegor but at Kylira. She had no time to dodge, no time to scream, but Rhaegor was faster. He threw himself between them, and the poisoned blade sank into his shoulder instead of her throat. Rhaegor gasped, his body going rigid. No! Kylira screamed. Valric stumbled backward, shock written across his face. You were supposed to watch her die. That was the point. To take away the one thing keeping you human so the curse would finally... He never finished the sentence. Rhaegor's fist caught him across the jaw with a sound like breaking stone. Valric flew backward, crashing into the wall hard enough to crack the mortar. He slumped to the floor, blood streaming from his mouth. The 6 warriors who had come with him dropped their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. Torvin's warriors surged forward, securing them quickly. But Kylira only had eyes for Rhaegor. He had fallen to one knee, his hand pressed against the wound in his shoulder. Black veins were spreading from the injury, crawling up his neck toward his face. Poison, he managed. Curse-touched, designed to force the transformation. No, no, no! Kylira dropped beside him, her hands hovering over the wound, not knowing what to do. Someone get a healer, now! But even as she said it, she could see what was happening. Rhaegor's eyes were flickering between gold and black. His breathing was becoming ragged. The curse was rising, triggered by the poison, fed by his weakened state. Kylira, his voice was strained. You need to run. When I lose control, I will not be able to stop. I am not running. She gripped his face between her hands, forcing him to look at her. Do you hear me? I am not leaving you. You have to. No. Her voice cracked. You have saved me more times than I can count. You have fought against impossible odds every single day of your life. and I will be damned if I let you face this alone. Rhaegor's form began to shift, his muscles expanded, bones cracking as the curse tried to take hold. The warriors backed away. Even Torvin looked uncertain, but Kaelira did not move. She started speaking. Not a story this time. Something else. Something raw and true and desperate. Do you remember the first night you came to my door? You stood in the threshold, and I could see the pain in your eyes. I did not know what it was then. I did not understand. But I saw you fighting. I saw you choosing to listen instead of destroy. And I have watched you make that choice every single night since. The transformation slowed. You are more than this curse, Rhaegor. You are the man who created a council instead of ruling alone. The man who is changing laws to protect the powerless. The man who took a blade meant for me without hesitation. Her voice broke. You are the man I chose. The man I will always choose, no matter what. Rhaegor's eyes locked onto hers. The black receded. The transformation stopped. With a shuddering gasp, he collapsed forward, and Kaelira caught him, cradling his head against her chest as he shook with the effort of maintaining control. That is it, she whispered. You are stronger than the poison, stronger than the curse. You are here, you are alive, and you are choosing to stay. A healer rushed into the room, carrying bags of herbs and bandages. She was an older woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering. Her name was Meryn, and she had served the fortress for 40 years. But before she could reach them, Rhaegor reached out and grabbed Kaelira's wrist. The curse, he rasped. I can feel it. Changing. The poison. It was designed to force transformation, but you stopped it midway. The curse is confused, destabilized. Kaelira's breath caught. What does that mean? It means there is a window, a moment where the curse is vulnerable. He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. We need to act now, before it stabilizes again. Meryn knelt beside them, examining the wound with practiced efficiency. Her face went pale as she traced the black veins spreading across his skin. My king, this poison is necrotically cursed. It will spread unless we— Can you purge it? Rhaegor interrupted. Not without killing you. The dosage is too high, and with your curse already active— She trailed off, her expression grim. I am sorry, my king. There is nothing I can do that would not end your life. There has to be another way, Kaelira said desperately. Meryn hesitated, her weathered hand stilling over the wound. There is one option, theoretically, but it has never been attempted, and the risks are beyond anything I have ever— Tell me, Rhaegor commanded. The healer took a deep breath. If we could force the curse to fully manifest while simultaneously purging the poison, the two forces might cancel each other out. The curse would consume the poison, but the poison would destabilize the curse enough that you might be able to reshape it. Reshape it how? Torvin demanded from where he stood watching. Meryn's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Into something that serves you instead of destroying you. The curse was created when your wolf was torn from you prematurely. It has existed as a force of pure agony ever since, neither fully beast nor fully man, trapped in a state of constant transformation. But if you could complete the transformation consciously, guide it instead of fighting it, you might be able to merge with your wolf properly. As you were always meant to. And if he cannot? Kaelira asked, though she feared the answer. Then the beast will consume him entirely. He will lose all humanity, all consciousness, all sense of self. He will become a creature of pure instinct and rage. Meryn looked at Rhaegor with something like pity. You would be the monster Vaelric always claimed you were. Silence filled the war room. Rhaegor slowly pushed himself upright, wincing as the movement sent fresh waves of poison through his system. Black veins now covered half his torso, creeping toward his heart with every passing second. Then that is what we will do, he said. You cannot be serious, Torvin protested. The risk is acceptable. Rhaegor's gaze swept across the assembled warriors and advisors. I have spent 23 years fighting this curse, running from it, trying to contain it like a disease instead of accepting it as part of who I am. Maybe it is time I stopped fighting and started listening. To what? Kaelira asked. He looked at her, and despite the poison and the pain, he smiled. To the part of me that has been screaming all this time. Maybe it is not just rage. Maybe it is something else, something I was too afraid to hear. Meryn nodded slowly. We will need to prepare a ritual circle. purification herbs, binding runes, blood catalysts. The process must be precise, or the energies will tear you apart before you have a chance to reshape them. How long? Rhaegor asked. An hour. Maybe 2 if we are thorough. Then let us begin. Torvin stepped forward, his gruff face creased with concern. My king, even if this works, the transformation will be visible to everyone. The entire fortress will see you at your most vulnerable. If there are still supporters of Valeric among us, then they will see their king fight for something better, Rhaegor interrupted. Let them watch. Let them all watch. This is not about hiding anymore. It is about choosing to be whole. The ritual took place in the same courtyard where Kaelira had faced the trial of the pack. Word had spread through the fortress like wildfire. By the time Meryn had finished her preparations, the entire court had gathered. Hundreds of wolves crowding the walls, filling the corridors, pressing close to witness what might be their king's final moments. Meryn worked quickly despite the audience, drawing intricate patterns across the stone with powdered silver and crushed bone. Other healers assisted, placing candles at specific points around the circle's perimeter, burning herbs that filled the air with thick, acrid smoke that made Kaelira's eyes water. Rhaegor stood in the center of the circle, stripped to the waist, his scarred torso covered in fresh runes painted in his own blood. The wound in his shoulder had spread dramatically. Black veins now covered his entire chest, creeping up his neck and down his arms like dark lightning frozen in flesh. Kaelira stood at the edge of the circle, her hands clenched so tightly her nails drew blood from her palms. The entire court had gathered to watch. Some faces were hopeful, others fearful. A few, those who had supported Valeric, looked almost eager to see their king fail, to validate their choice to follow the old ways. Valeric himself had been dragged to the courtyard in chains, forced to watch from the ground, where 2 guards held him down. His face was battered beyond recognition, one eye swollen completely shut, but his remaining eye burned with undimmed hatred. "You will fail," he called out, his voice raw. "The curse cannot be tamed. It can only be endured or embraced. Your father tried to reshape it. Your grandfather tried. They all died screaming, torn apart by the very power they thought they could control." Edgar did not respond. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow and deliberate, as if he were already preparing himself for the battle to come. Meryn stepped back from the circle, her silver-streaked hair wild around her face. "It is ready, my king. Once I activate the runes, the curse will be forced to fully manifest. You will have perhaps 5 minutes before it consumes you completely. In that time, you must find the core of the affliction and reshape it. Bend it to your will instead of letting it bend you." "How will I find the core?" Rhaegor asked without opening his eyes. "You will know it when you see it. It will be the thing you fear most, the thing you have been running from your entire life." Meryn's voice softened. "Face it, my king. Do not fight it. Do not flee from it. Simply accept it. And in accepting it, you may find the power to change it." Rhaegor's jaw tightened. He opened his eyes and looked directly at Kaelira. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the 2 of them, the cursed king and the powerless girl who had somehow found each other in the darkness. "If I do not come back," he began. "You will come back," Kaelira said firmly, though her voice shook. "But if I do not, I need you to know that you saved me. Not from the curse, from myself, from the belief that I was nothing more than the pain I carried." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You gave me hope, and that is worth more than any crown." Tears streamed down Kaelira's face. "Rhaegor, tell me you will be all right. Promise me." She wanted to scream that she would not be all right, that if he died she would shatter into pieces that could never be put back together. But she saw the desperate need in his eyes, the need to believe that even if he failed, the changes he had started would continue. So she lied. "I promise," she whispered. For a moment, something soft flickered across his face, relief mixed with sorrow, love tangled with farewell. Then he nodded to Meryn. "Begin." The healer touched the first rune with a piece of blessed chalk. The circle exploded with light so bright that half the assembled wolves cried out and turned away. Rhaegor screamed. It was not a human sound. It was the shriek of something trapped and dying, something that had been caged for too long and was finally terrifyingly free. The sound echoed off the fortress walls, multiplying and distorting until it seemed like 1,000 tortured souls were crying out at once. His body convulsed violently, bones broke with sounds like snapping branches. then reformed into new and terrible shapes. Muscles tore and rebuilt themselves, expanding far beyond human limits. Fur erupted across his skin, black as midnight, shot through with veins of corrupted gold that pulsed with sickly light. His face elongated into a muzzle filled with teeth like shattered obsidian. Claws burst from his fingertips, each one as long as a sword and sharp enough to carve stone. But this time, something was different. The transformation did not stop at the familiar shadow beast that the court had seen before. It kept going, pushing further, becoming something else entirely. Something larger, more primal, more absolutely wrong. The creature that emerged stood nearly 15 feet tall. Its form flickered between solid and smoke, as if it could not quite decide whether it belonged to the physical world or some nightmare realm beyond. Its eyes were voids, not black, but empty, as if looking into them meant staring at the complete absence of everything. The crowd gasped, some screamed. Several warriors drew their weapons on instinct, though their hands shook too badly to hold them steady. Kyalira stood frozen at the edge of the circle, watching as the man she loved disappeared beneath layers of curse and corruption and 23 years of accumulated agony. The beast threw back its head and howled, a sound that made the previous scream seem like a whisper. The fortress itself seemed to shudder, stone cracked, windows shattered, warriors fell to their knees clutching their ears. Then, impossibly, she heard his voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing through the courtyard like distant thunder rolling across mountains. I see it. The core. It is not what I expected. The beast's form shuddered, smoke roiling off its body in waves. It is a cage built from every wound, every betrayal, every moment I was told I was not enough. Every time my father looked at me with disgust, every time the shamans cut into me, searching for power, every time I chose pain over death because I was too afraid to let go. Kalira's breath caught. Around her, the courtyard had gone deathly silent despite the chaos. Every wolf present seemed transfixed by the impossible sight before them. Their king, transformed into nightmare incarnate, speaking truths that cut deeper than any blade. And inside the cage, Rhaegor's voice continued, growing stronger despite its otherworldly echo. Inside is a wolf. Just a wolf. Young, terrified, alone. He is not twisted or corrupted or evil. He is just lost. The beast began to change. The shadows started peeling away layer by layer like dead skin sloughing off to reveal something underneath. Something smaller, more defined. They ripped him out of me before he was ready, Rhaegor said, and now his voice carried notes of grief so profound that Kyalira felt tears spring to her eyes. Before he had a name, before he knew what he was supposed to be, before he understood that becoming meant more than just surviving, and then they punished him, punished us, for being broken, for not being perfect on the first try. The courtyard remained utterly still. Even Veilric had stopped struggling against his guards, his remaining eye wide with something that might have been recognition or horror. He has been screaming all this time, not because he wants to destroy, not because he is a monster, but because he does not know how to exist without pain, because pain was the first thing he ever knew, and he thought it was all he would ever be. The transformation continued to reverse, but slowly now, as if something fundamental was being rebuilt rather than simply undone. What if... Rhaegor's voice dropped to barely a whisper that somehow still carried to every corner of the courtyard. What if I stopped trying to cage him? What if I stopped seeing him as a curse to be controlled or a weapon to be wielded? What if I just let him be what he was always meant to be? Kalira found her voice. And what is that? She called out. The beast's void-like eyes turned toward her, and for a heartbeat she thought she saw a flicker of gold deep within the darkness. Free, Rhaegor answered simply. The transformation reversed completely. The shadows condensed, pulling inward instead of radiating outward. The flickering stopped. The wrongness in the air began to dissipate like morning fog burning away under sunlight. And from the center of the maelstrom, a wolf emerged. It was massive, larger than any normal wolf, larger even than the dire wolves that pulled the tribute cages and hunted in the deepest mountains. Its shoulders came up to a tall man's chest. Its paws were the size of dinner plates. But it was beautiful. Its fur was black shot through with veins of pure silver that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Its eyes were gold, not the burning, agonized gold of the curse, but bright and clear and utterly, devastatingly aware. They held intelligence, yes, but also something else. Peace. wholeness, the quiet contentment of something that had finally found its proper shape. The wolf threw back its head and howled, not a scream of agony, but a song of pure, unbridled freedom. The sound rolled across the mountains, echoing back from distant peaks, multiplying until it seemed like the entire world was singing. Then the wolf began to shrink, its form condensing down, 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 until it folded back into the shape of a man. Rhaegor collapsed to his hands and knees in the center of the circle, gasping for breath. His skin was slick with sweat, his entire body trembling with exhaustion. The black veins that had covered his chest were gone. The wound in his shoulder had closed, leaving only a faint silver scar. The runes around the circle flickered once, twice, then went dark and still. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, no one moved. Then Kalira was running. She stumbled into the circle, her legs barely holding her weight, and fell to her knees beside him. Her hands hovered over his back, afraid to touch, afraid that he might shatter like glass. "Did it work?" she asked desperately, her voice breaking. Are you still?" Rhaegor looked up at her. His eyes were different. Still gold, but no longer burning with barely contained agony. They were clear, calm, human. And when he smiled, truly smiled, not the broken half-expression she had seen before, it transformed his entire face. "It worked," he said, and his voice was his own again, no longer carrying that otherworldly echo. "The curse is still there. I can feel it, like a second heartbeat in my chest. But it is mine now, part of me. Not a monster I have to fight every second of every day, but a wolf I can run with when I choose." Kalira let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She threw her arms around him, and he held her tightly, his face buried in her hair, his body shaking with relief or exhaustion, or maybe both. Around them, the courtyard exploded into chaos. Warriors slammed their weapons against their shields in thunderous salute. Advisors bowed low. Servants wept openly. The sound built and built until it seemed like the very stones of the fortress were celebrating. Even some of those who had supported Vaelric looked awed, their certainty shaken by witnessing something they had believed impossible. Torvin approached the circle slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might break the spell. His gruff face was split by a smile wider than Kalira had ever seen. "You did it, boy," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You actually did it. In 40 years of war and service, I have never seen anything like that." Rhaegor stood slowly, pulling Kalira up with him. His legs wavered slightly, but he remained upright. "I could not have done it alone. None of this, none of it, would have been possible without—" He looked down at Kalira, and the love in his eyes was so naked and honest that she felt her breath catch. "Without her." Meryn stepped into the circle, her healer's instincts overriding the moment's significance. She examined Rhaegor with practiced efficiency, checking his pulse, looking into his eyes, pressing her fingers against the scar on his shoulder. "The poison is completely gone," she said, wonder creeping into her voice. "Consumed by the transformation, just as I hoped. The wound has healed cleanly. No infection, no corruption. And your curse—" She trailed off, searching for words. "Is no longer a curse," Rhaegor finished. "It is just me. The wolf and the man, finally in harmony." Meryn nodded slowly. "I have been a healer for 40 years. I have seen plagues and poisons, battles and betrayals, but I have never seen anyone survive what you just did, let alone emerge stronger." She bowed her head. "You have my loyalty, my king, for whatever that is worth." "It is worth everything," Rhaegor said quietly. He turned to face the assembled court, and Kalira saw the moment when the scattered crowd truly saw him, not as a cursed king or a monster barely contained, but as something new, something whole. "Lord Vaelric," Rhaegor said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. The guards dragged the former advisor forward, forcing him to his knees at the edge of the circle. Vaelric's face was a ruin of swelling and bruises, but his remaining eyes still burned with defiance. "You told me once that the curse was a tool," Rhaegor continued, "a weapon that made me strong. You were right about one thing. It was a tool. But you were wrong about who it was meant to serve." He paused, and Kalira saw something complicated pass across his face. Not quite pity, but perhaps understanding. "You spent decades trying to keep me broken because you believed suffering made me powerful. And maybe, in a twisted way, you thought you were helping. But you forgot something crucial." Rhaegor's voice hardened, A king who rules through pain alone is not strong. He is simply waiting to break. Valeric spat blood onto the stone. You are making a mistake. Without the curse controlling you, driving you, you will grow soft, weak. The other clans will see it. They will smell the weakness on you like blood in water, and they will come for you, for all of you. Then let them come. Rhaegar's voice was steel wrapped in silk. And they will find a kingdom united, not by fear, but by choice. Not by the threat of violence, but by the promise of something better. He gestured to the guards. Lord Vialric, you are hereby stripped of your titles, your lands, and your position in this court. You will be exiled beyond the borders of this kingdom and forbidden from ever returning. If you do, the sentence is death. Not by torture, not by spectacle. Just death. Quick and final. Valeric's face twisted with impotent rage. This is not over. You think you have won, but you have only delayed the inevitable. The old ways will return. They always do, and when they do, we will face them, Kaelira interrupted, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. She stepped forward to stand beside Rhaegar. Together, as we have faced everything else. Valeric's gaze shifted to her, and for just a moment she saw something that might have been respect flicker in his remaining eye. Then it was gone. The guards dragged him away. His protest faded into the distance, swallowed by the fortress's stone corridors. As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement and speculation about what they had witnessed, Torvin approached Rhaegar and Kaelira again. My king, he said formally. My queen. There is still the matter of succession, of formally recognizing the bond between you. Rhaegar glanced at Kaelira, a question in his eyes. She took his hand. I think, she said carefully, that the time for hiding is over. A slow smile spread across Rhaegar's face. He turned to address what remained of the crowd, still several hundred wolves, all watching with rapt attention. I have an announcement, he said, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard. Kaelira Voss came to this fortress as a tribute, as payment for her father's rebellion, as a thing to be used and discarded. The crowd murmured. But she became something else entirely. She became the voice that pulled me back from the edge when I thought I was beyond saving. She became the courage I needed to face my own fears. She became... He paused, then continued quietly. She became the reason I wanted to be more than my curse. He turned to Kaelira, and suddenly the entire fortress seemed to be watching them. I have no pretty words, Rhaegar said. No grand speeches or romantic declarations. All I have is the truth. He took both her hands in his. You have no bloodline, no power in the traditional sense, no wolf to give you status in a society built on strength of claw and fang, and I do not care. Kaelira felt tears building behind her eyes. I care that you faced cursed beasts and won with nothing but words. I care that you walked into a poisoned circle to defend me when everyone else stepped back. I care that you have given me something I thought I had lost forever, hope. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow it still carried. Kaelira Voss, will you stand beside me? Not as a tribute, not as a prisoner, not as a political necessity, but as my equal, my partner, my chosen mate, my queen. The courtyard held its collective breath. Kaelira looked into his golden eyes, clear and bright and utterly, devastatingly sincere, and saw everything she had been searching for since the moment the wolves came to drag her away from her father's hut. Safety, yes. But more than that, acceptance, purpose, home. Yes, she whispered. Then louder, her voice ringing clear. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The courtyard exploded with sound. Warriors howled their approval. Advisors applauded. Servants watching from the walls shouted their joy. The noise built and built until it seemed like the mountains themselves were celebrating. Traeger pulled her close and kissed her, and Kaelira felt something inside her chest crack open. Not breaking, but blooming, like a flower that had been waiting years in frozen ground for the right season to finally arrive. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and smiling, Torvin was grinning so widely his face looked like it might split. Well then, the old warlord said, looks like we have a coronation to plan. And not just any coronation, a joining ceremony. The first in this fortress in 20 years. How long do these ceremonies usually take to prepare? Kaelira asked. 3 months, traditionally. We need to send messengers to all the clans, prepare the feast, commission the crowns. 3 weeks, Rhaegor interrupted. Torvin blinked. My king, that is barely enough time to— 3 weeks, Rhaegor repeated firmly. We have spent enough time waiting, enough time preparing, enough time being afraid of what might go wrong. I want to start building the future now, not 3 months from now. Now. Torvin looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Rhaegor's expression stopped him. Instead, he laughed, a deep, booming sound. 3 weeks it is, then. The servants will be furious, but they will manage. He bowed deeply. My king, my queen, if you will excuse me, I have a mountain of work to coordinate. He strode off, already barking orders to nearby warriors and advisors. Kaelyra and Rhaegor were left standing in the center of the now empty courtyard, the ritual circle's faded runes barely visible on the stone around them. 3 weeks, Kaelyra said. Are you sure? I have never been more sure of anything. Rhaegor pulled her close again, resting his chin on top of her head. I have wasted 23 years of my life being afraid, being controlled by pain and the people who wanted to use that pain for their own purposes. I refuse to waste another moment. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, feeling the warmth of sunlight on their faces and listening to the distant sounds of the fortress coming alive with purpose. Finally, Kaelyra pulled back just enough to look up at him. What happens now? In these 3 weeks before the ceremony? Rhaegor smiled. Now we keep the promises we made. We finish changing the laws. We establish the councils. We send messengers to the border clans, inviting them to witness a new kind of kingdom. He paused. And we live. Really live. Not just survive. That sounds perfect, Kaelyra said. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she believed it. Oh, the 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Messengers rode out to every corner of the kingdom carrying invitations sealed with black wax and the king's personal mark. Some returned with acceptances. Others brought refusals, clan leaders who believed the old ways were being abandoned, who saw weakness in the changes Rhaegor proposed. But more came bearing gifts and promises of attendance than Torvin had predicted. They are curious, he explained one evening as he reviewed the responses with Rhaegor and Kaelyra. The story of the cursed king who tamed his affliction and the powerless girl who became queen has spread faster than wildfire. Everyone wants to see if it is true, if you are real. And if they come planning to challenge us? Kaelyra asked. Torvin shrugged. Then we show them what we have built, and we let them decide if they want to be part of it or stand against it. The laws continued to change. Edicts protecting those without wolves were carved into stone and displayed in the main hall. Councils were established in 3 major settlements, with representatives chosen by the people rather than appointed by force. Kaelyra spent hours each day reviewing proposals, mediating disputes, learning the intricate dance of governance. It was exhausting, overwhelming, wonderful. She was no longer the broken girl sent as tribute. She was becoming someone new, someone with purpose and power. Not the power of claws, but the power to shape the world through words and choices and unwavering conviction. Rhaegor changed too. The constant tension that had defined him began to ease. He smiled more, laughed occasionally, slept through entire nights without waking in agony. The wolf was still there. She could see it sometimes in the way his eyes caught the light, in the grace of his movements. But it was integrated now, part of him rather than something he fought. They spent their evenings together, often in the library, trading stories like gifts. Sometimes he would tell her about the kingdom's history, about battles and treaties and the complicated web of alliances that held the frontier clans together. Other times she would tell him about the small village where she had grown up, about her mother's stories and the ocean she had never seen, and the dreams she had thought were lost forever. And slowly, carefully, they built something between them that felt like home. The coronation took place on the night of the new moon, when the sky was black as velvet and scattered with more stars than could be counted. They held it in the courtyard, the same place where everything had changed, where Kaelyra had survived her trial and Rhaegor had broken his curse. It seemed fitting that this final transformation should happen there too. Wolves came from across the kingdom and beyond. The frontier clans arrived first, rough warriors in travel-stained leathers who eyed the fortress with suspicion, but came anyway. The mountain packs followed, bringing gifts of furs and carved bone. Even representatives from the coastal families made the long journey, curious to see what had become of the Black Fortress and its cursed king. By the time night fell, nearly 1,000 wolves packed the courtyard and overflowed into the surrounding corridors. Kaelira wore a gown of midnight blue so dark it was almost black, embroidered with silver thread that caught the torchlight like stars scattered across a night sky. Her hair was unbound, falling in dark waves down her back, held back from her face only by a circlet of iron and wolf's bone. Simple, unadorned, but undeniably regal. Rhaegor stood beside her in armor polished to a mirror shine, every dent and scratch from decades of battle carefully preserved. His crown matched hers, iron and bone, a reminder that strength came from surviving wounds rather than avoiding them. Meryn performed the ceremony, her silver-streaked hair braided with flowers that only bloomed under moonlight. Her voice carried through the courtyard as she recited oaths older than the fortress itself, words in a language that predated the wolf clans and spoke to something primal in every person present. When she asked Rhaegor to present his queen to the kingdom, he took Kaelira's hand and turned to face the assembled wolves. "This woman saved my life," he said, his voice clear and strong. "Not once, but many times. She saw something in me worth saving when I could not see it myself. When I was drowning in pain and convinced I was nothing more than the curse that consumed me, she threw me a lifeline made of stories and stubborn hope." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some approving, others uncertain. "And together," Rhaegor continued, "we will build a kingdom where that is the rule, not the exception. Where the broken are not discarded but given the chance to become whole. Where strength is measured not by the size of your claws or the ferocity of your wolf, but by the courage to keep fighting for something better, even when the world tells you to give up." He looked down at Kaelira, and the love in his eyes was so profound that she felt tears threatening. She has no wolf, no traditional power, and yet she is the strongest person I know. She walked into fire for me, faced down cursed beasts with nothing but words, changed an entire kingdom through sheer force of will. His voice dropped to something softer. Let that be the foundation of what we build. Not fear, not pain, but the recognition that true strength comes from choosing to be better than our wounds. The crowd erupted in howls, thousands of voices joining together in a chorus that shook the mountains and rolled across the valleys like thunder. As the ceremony concluded and the feast began, Kaelira found herself swept into a whirlwind of introductions and congratulations. Warriors she had never met bowed to her with genuine respect. Advisors from distant clans sought her counsel. Mothers brought their children, especially the ones without wolves, the ones who had been told they were worthless, to meet the queen who proved that power took many forms. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. Late in the night, as the celebration continued with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army, Kaelira slipped away from the crowd. She needed air, space, a moment to process the magnitude of what had just happened. She climbed to the top of the Western Tower, the place where she had spent those first lonely months as a prisoner, where she had paced and counted stones and tried not to lose herself to despair. She stood at the window, looking out over the kingdom that was now hers to help shape, and tried to comprehend the distance between that broken girl and the queen she had become. Footsteps sounded behind her. She did not need to turn to know who it was. Rhaegor joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her from behind in a gesture that had become familiar and precious. "Hiding from your own coronation feast?" Just taking a moment to breathe. She leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Both of his heartbeats, human and wolf, beating in perfect synchrony. Is it always going to be like this? Probably. Being queen is not exactly restful. He paused. Having second thoughts? Not even for a second. She turned in his arms to face him. "I was just thinking about how far we have both come. How different things could have been. Different how? If you had been the monster they said you were. If I had been the broken thing they believed. If we had both given up instead of choosing to fight." Rhaegor cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized were falling. "But we did not give up. We chose each other. We chose to be better than our wounds. And that choice, that single stubborn choice, changed everything." From below, the sounds of celebration drifted up, laughter and music and the howls of wolves who had found hope in the most unlikely of places. "What happens now?" Kaelira asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Now we live. Rhaegor smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had finally found peace after decades of war. We keep the promises we made. We change the laws and lift up the powerless, and prove that a kingdom can be strong without being cruel. We make mistakes and learn from them and try again. We build something that lasts not because it was perfect from the start, but because we refused to stop trying. He paused, then added softly, and we tell stories. Lots and lots of stories. Kaelira stood on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promises yet to be made. When they pulled apart, she said, "Tell me one now. Tell me a story about what comes next." So he did. He told her about a kingdom that rose from fear and ashes to become something better, something kinder, something worth defending. About a queen who had no traditional power but changed an empire anyway through sheer force of conviction and compassion. About a king who learned that strength and gentleness could exist in the same heart, that being whole meant accepting all parts of yourself, the light and the dark, the human and the wolf. He told her about councils where the powerless could speak and be heard, about laws that protected the weak instead of punishing them, about children who would grow up knowing that their worth was not determined by their claws, but by their choices. And when he finished, Kaelira told him one back, about a girl who had been told she was worthless and broken and useless, who had been sent to die but chose to live instead, who found love in the darkest place imaginable and used it to build a light that would never go out, about a wolf who had been screaming for 23 years and finally learned to sing. They stood together in the moonless night, trading stories like sacred gifts, and far below them, the Black Fortress, no longer black, no longer a tomb, no longer a place where hope went to die, glowed with the light of 1,000 torches, a beacon visible for miles, a promise carved in stone and sealed with blood and hope and love that refused to break. The wolves who had gathered from across the kingdom would carry tales of this night back to their clans. They would speak of the cursed king who tamed his affliction through acceptance rather than violence, of the powerless girl who became queen and proved that strength took many forms, of a kingdom that chose to change, slowly and imperfectly but undeniably. Some would believe the stories. Others would dismiss them as fantasy, but the truth remained, carved into the foundations of the Black Fortress like the ancient runes that had witnessed everything. Sometimes the broken things are not meant to be discarded. Sometimes they are meant to be the foundation upon which something new is built. Sometimes the powerless become powerful not by gaining claws, but by refusing to be defined by their absence. And sometimes, just sometimes, love is stronger than any curse. In the mountains beyond the fortress, wolves howled their approval to the stars. And in the western tower, two people who had survived the impossible held each other close and whispered stories into the night. Stories about what had been, what was, and what would come. Together. Always together.